Tonight, question time has come to Trowbridge in the rural county of Wiltshire. Politically, Wiltshire's long been a Conservative heartland. Until last summer's election, that is, when Labour and the Lib Dems won 5 of the 8 seats across the county. In the last few hours, our local audience members have been arriving here and preparing their questions and thoughts for our panel. As a group, as usual, they reflect the general electoral picture across the nation. Tonight they want to ask, do the protesting farmers have a point, or should they be paying the same taxes as the rest of us? And what about the escalating war in Ukraine? How worried should we be? Welcome to Question Time. From the government is Nick Thomas-Symonds. He's a minister for the Cabinet Office, a former barrister. He's also written biographies of famous figures, Knight Bevan, Clement Attlee and Harold Wilson. From the Conservatives, Harriett Baldwin is Shadow Business Minister. She previously chaired the influential cross-party Treasury Select Committee and also served in the governments of Theresa May and David Cameron. Daisy Cooper is a deputy leader of the Liberal Democrats and also her party's Treasury spokesperson. She's in her 6th year as an MP and now has 71 other Lib Dem MP colleagues beside her in Parliament. And until this year, Minette Batters was president of the National Farmers Union. She'd been 6 years in that job. She's also a tenant farmer of a 300-acre farm, and since the summer she's become Baroness Batters and sits in the House of Lords as a crossbench peer. Welcome to our panellists, welcome to our audience here in Trowbridge, great to see you, and of course welcome to you at home. You can join in the conversation the usual way on social media. We're on iPlayer, we're on BBC Sounds, we're everywhere. And before we start, I just wanted to add Question Time's tribute to those paid to the former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, who has died. He was a stalwart of this programme. He appeared on the programme some 29 times. Latterly, his last appearance was in 2018, and he was always the most colourful of contributors. And of course, we send our condolences to his family. Right, let's start our programme with our very first question, which is from Vanessa Bradish.
Why do some farmers believe that they shouldn't pay inheritance tax like everybody else?
Well, Minette, why not answer that question? Why don't you take us away first?
Yeah. It's a really complicated picture, and everybody will have seen the protests this week and the real concern and enormous worry that is going on. APR has been available for farming.
Do you want to explain what that is for those who aren't farmers here?
I could be here for the whole programme.
Well, OK, agricultural property relief basically was uncapped, and it meant that you didn't have to pay inheritance tax.
Yeah, so that has been in place for 40 years. And suddenly now the proposal has come to change this. Absolutely get the challenge for the budget and public services right now. But the way this is being done is going after relatively small family farms. So you've got, effectively, your lifestyle businesses, which fall within that bracket below £1 million. Then
what
you've
do you
got
mean
your
by lifestyle businesses?
Well, people who've got a house and a few acres, perhaps a few ponies, they're not
or
productive.
Small holding, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're not productive farming and contributing to the nation's food, effectively. That's fine.
So Vanessa's question is why shouldn't farmers pay inheritance tax?
Well, I'm trying to explain. So you've got these ones that are stuck in the middle. You've got large landowners. The largest landowner is actually the government of land. So you've got very large landowners. You've also got private equity businesses. You've got pension funds. You've got corporations, all of whom don't have to pay inheritance tax. But this small group in the middle does have to pay inheritance tax. Now, you could easily condition this, that if, you know, the grandfather died and you were going to sell the farm within a year or within 2 years, you could say, well, those have to pay inheritance tax. But these businesses are getting handed down, so they are very cash poor and, yes, asset rich, but they're only asset rich if they sell. So what they're making, I mean, DEFRA's own figures show that 50% of farm businesses either made no profit or made a profit of less than 23,000. So they cannot pay. I mean, a 500-acre farm would be looking at a tax bill of 800,000, when they are making less than 50,000 themselves. That would be 80,000 every year. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, you would have to sell land and we would break up these businesses. Now, all for going after people who are selling their business and using business asset rollover relief to offset their capital gains tax. That is driving land prices. And when this land gets sold by these family farms, then those others will be buying it up. So I don't think the policy and the rhetoric match what politicians
can I
are
just
saying.
ask you, is there any level at which you think farmers should be liable for inheritance tax? At the moment, depending if you're married or not, it would amount to about 3 million before you'd have to pay. I know there's various things within that, but it's roughly that if you are married. Is there a level at which you think inheritance tax should be paid by farmers, or do you think it should be paid by no farmers?
I think you need to consult with the industry and get the evidence. The NFU's evidence at the moment looks like 75% of farms sit above that £1 million threshold, not 27%. So if 75% of farms do sit above that threshold, that's got to be looked at.
But just on the principle, because until the government changed the rules, no farms had to pay inheritance tax. Do you think there is a level at which farms should pay? You obviously think it's too low now. But is there a level at which you think farms should pay inheritance tax, or should the very wealthy landowners not have to pay it either?
They're not very wealthy. That's the whole
I'm just
point.
saying, but as a principle...
I would say, tax them on what they're making, by all means. Yes, if they are making substantive products, tax them on that. But this breaking up of these small businesses, that's the tragedy, and that's what's got to be avoided. So consultation is needed to provide the evidence and then act and look perhaps to raise the threshold if it's being affected.
But whether or not inheritance tax should be paid by anyone in farming, I realise I don't have an answer from you. Nick? This has caused so much upset with the farming community. Did you not see this coming?
Well, listen, I used to shadow the Home Affairs brief in opposition, and I was doing a lot of work then around rural crime, speaking to communities about that, particularly rural communities, and that there's unhappiness in rural communities and huge concern came as, of course, no surprise. It's what I've seen in recent years and many years past. But can I just say, first of all, that the government in the budget made a £5 billion investment in farming and agriculture over the next couple of years, which is the single biggest investment in sustainable food production in this country's history. And this government as well will be, for example, protecting farmers in trade deals. I know, Minette, was something you used to raise, about the trade deals the previous government had signed. We will look to negotiate a veterinary agreement between the UK and the European Union so that farmers can trade their produce more easily. We will publish, to go back to my point...
let's talk, the question's about inheritance tax. So let's just get to the core of Vanessa's question, which is about inheritance tax. What are we all supposed to make of the figures? Because on the one hand, you've got the government talking about, something like 520 estates per year may be affected by these changes. Obviously, these changes will affect not farms just on a year, they will affect farmers for years to come. And then you've got figures that are being quoted by the National Farmers Union and others, which are saying far more farms will be affected. What are we all supposed to make of it?
Well, we're basing that figure of 500 of the wealthiest being affected per year on HMRC figures. You, of course, do have a situation if you have a couple, and I think, Fiona, you referred to it yourself a moment or two ago. If you look at agricultural property relief, which is, if you like, the tax relief on the land, plus the reliefs that a couple would get who were living, of course, in the property on the land and passing it on to their descendants, it's £3 million, above which the rate is then 20%, which, in direct answer to the question, is half of what the normal figure is.
In terms of the number of farms that are being affected... Hang on, Nick. In terms of the number of farms being affected, if the government's saying 520 estates will be affected per year, overall, out of all the farms that there are in this country, it was at 200,000 or something like that, how many overall would be affected by these changes in inheritance tax? Not per year, but overall, because those are the figures that the NFU is using.
Well, yes, and there is a dispute with the
So what are the government's figures
The government figure, which I think Minette referenced, is about 27% of the total. So if you look at that, you can do that per year or you can do it in total. Per year, it's around about 500.
And overall?
The actual figure, you've then got the unaffected number is around about 1,500 per year. So that's the figure.
So no, the question I'm asking is, how many farms overall
Well, it's 27%. It's 27%.
And how many is that in numbers?
It's a yearly figure.
How many is that in numbers?
Of 2,000 per year, around about 500, as I say, will be affected. They will be the wealthiest farms. The other three-quarters will not. But can I just...
No, Nick, hang on, because this is what we don't understand. You've got Minette saying it's going to be about 70,000 farms will be affected.
75,000
75,000 farms will be over the limit.
Threshold.
How many overall does the government think are over that limit?
The figure that we rely upon, and it comes from HMRC, is 27% of the total. You can do it 27% per year, you can do it 20% overall, or 27% overall.
So how many farms is that in total?
The point that
What's the number?
Hang on. The point I want to come to on this is this.
I don't want to press it. You don't know the number.
We have had... Well, it's 27% of the total number. But the point I want
to just... That's about 54,000.
The point that I just want to make on this is, look, nobody is saying this is an easy decision, but we have had to balance up, on the one hand, fixing the public finances, and, in addition to that, investing in our public services that communities, rural and urban, up and down the country, rely on, and rebuilding our NHS. What we also have tried to do is to ensure that we're protecting small family farms as well. Okay. That's the balance the government's trying to strike.
I know you want to come back in, and I also want to come to you. I just want to hear a bit from the audience. Vanessa, you asked this question, and the way you phrased it was, why should some farmers believe they shouldn't pay inheritance tax like the rest of us? Do you think they should?
I'd like to be persuaded otherwise, yeah. You know, I think I don't see why they shouldn't. I can't think of a reason why they shouldn't. So the reason why I asked the question was because, you know, I'd genuinely like to know the answer, because other businesses pay inheritance tax. If you had a bed and breakfast or something and you lived on the property, then when family members inherit that business, that is also their home, as well as their income.
OK, let's hear a bit from our audience, yeah. Sorry, I will come to you, I promise. Man with the glasses there.
Yeah, I thought inheritance tax was to tax the wealth that somebody inherits, whereas these farmers are inheriting a way of life, a livelihood, and therefore they're not actually going to gain anything in wealth. So if they were to sell it, yes, OK, go for the capital gains, go for other taxes. But the inheritance tax, no, this is one that they shouldn't get burdened with.
OK, woman at the back there with a hand up. Yes, you've got a black top on.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that Labour doesn't actually know what it's doing, because you've kind of sort of like tax people who do food, then you want to actually kind of make people poorer who've worked and contributed. So it's like, what are you doing? And I always think it's just a stalling tactic for actually just to tax people in the end. No. What are you doing? Because I don't know.
OK, man at the back in the blue shirt.
Hi, I keep hearing this term cash poor and asset rich, and I understand my maths aren't great, but for £400,000 worth of inheritance tax, you have a £5 million estate. I'm afraid you're going to have to find me the world's smallest violin to tell me that you don't pay tax on an estate that you're passing down to your children of £5 million. It sounds crazy to me. The other point I would make is, I understand that farmers don't make huge profits, but in the non-farming world, if you're making a profit of £23,000, which is just over or around the minimum wage, you're insolvent. And any of us running a business in this audience that are making those sort of numbers, we would legally be forced to close that business because we would be insolvent.
Of course, as you know, farming has traditionally had subsidies from the government, because there's a recognition from the government that we need food and it's not necessarily the most profitable business to be carrying out. Is that not something that persuades you?
No, I think the issues there lie further up and down the chain. I think the supermarkets and the prices that they force farmers into supplying at needs to be looked at in more detail.
Okay.
Because clearly they're supplying their product at a price that's unsustainable as a business.
OK. Now, Minette, I know you want to come back in. Now, let me bring the rest of the panel. Harriett.
Well, what I heard from the farmers from Worcestershire who came down to see me and lobby me on Tuesday were some really, really emotional stories. And these were people who were in floods of tears for their family livelihoods. And we heard a huge obfuscation of statistics from Nick just now. 100% of family farmers over time will find themselves caught in this process.
Of course, they may not all pass on their farms to be inherited.
And they may not all pass on their farms to be inherited, but all of the family farmers who want to pass on to the next generation do something very, very precious for us. And that is that they provide food security to the UK. And one of the things that I learnt this week was a phrase from Clement Attlee, about whom Nick has written a biography, which was that after the First World War, where we ran into food security issues, he vowed that the UK should never find itself in that position again. So that, I think, is what makes this different from the ordinary family who is caught in an inheritance trap situation. These are people who put food on our table, who provide the milk in our supermarkets, who are the people who feed us. And so, therefore, to take away a fifth of their farm every time it changes generation, you can see how, over the long term, that is going to erode their ability not only to pass down the land, but really importantly, to pass down those traditions of dairy farming, those traditions of arable farming,
I mean, I think
which are the things that make our breakfast.
It's worth pointing out, isn't it, just in the interest of balance, that, you know, the Conservatives are swinging right behind the farmers. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, Minette, but, I mean, there was a time when the National Farmers Union was very unhappy with the Conservatives in terms of trade deals, and with Australia, for example. I mean, even the former Environment Secretary said it wasn't a good deal in the end, once he was out of office. And in terms of replacing the subsidies that were given by the EU, they were not replaced in anything like the same amount. Well, so you weren't the farmer's best friend then.
Oh, I'm just trying to explain to Vanessa why I think it is important that we make this distinction as far as inheritance tax is concerned. And as Minette will know well, I, like many members of Parliament, meet regularly with my local farmers. And yes, they do always have things that they want to raise and to change in the world. But I think the principle that we rely on farming for our national food security, for the soil of this country to be producing the food that we eat, is something that is truly unique about farming, and why I think we have this exception.
So, Daisy, what about Vanessa here? Because, I mean, obviously this has been in the news for a week or so, and Vanessa, you will have heard the arguments. You've heard the arguments so far. Minette's spoken very passionately about it, and you're yet to be persuaded. I know you support the farms in this. How would you persuade someone like Vanessa and the other voices we've heard?
Let me try and persuade Vanessa. So,
not to put you on the spot, right?
Farmers are really critical to food security. They are the guardians of our natural environment, and we cannot decarbonise our food supply chains in this country without their support. We are an island nation. If you look around the world, there is political instability, there is the threat of future pandemics, we have climate change. We have got to, as an island nation, make sure that we can feed ourselves. And that food security and the food production can only come from protecting farmers in this country. I think what we have from Labour's measure is the worst of both worlds. So I am very strongly in favour of closing the loophole that allows the super wealthy and the private equity companies to buy up land and exploit it and pretend that they're farming when they're not. But the measure that Labour have taken doesn't close that loophole. It's still efficient in tax terms for them to keep buying land. But at the same time, there are family farms that are going to be hit by this measure effectively as collateral damage. So actually, we've got the worst of both worlds. There is a different way that the government could have approached this. They could have looked at, for example, what happens in some other countries where there's a genuine family farm test. So actually, people who are exploiting the loophole get cracked down on, but you protect family farms. And that's just one example of what could have happened. But I think it's really important to remember that whilst it's this particular issue that has caught sort of the public's imagination, farmers have been really hit hard by a number of other things in the budget. They've been hit by the national insurance contribution increase as well, because they are employers. They've also had facing the prospect of their basic payments getting cut faster than the new system is coming in. And I think what this debate has highlighted is that farmers genuinely are operating on wafer-thin margins. And to the gentleman at the back, I think you're absolutely right. Now is the time that we have to have a national conversation about why it is that we have a country where we have vegetables rotting in the field and children starving in school. Why is it we expect our farmers to take all the risk, get none of the reward, and ordinary folk can't afford to eat locally, healthily grown food? Those are the questions we should be discussing.
Well, let me ask you, Daisy, the question that I asked Minette. Because you, the Lib Dems, also have been very critical of Labour in this. Do you think inheritance tax should be paid by any farmers?
Right now, in the current circumstances where farmers are literally living hand to mouth, not right now.
I mean,
no.
there are some farmers. I totally hear what you say. There are farmers in that position, absolutely. There are some wealthy farmers, big landowners.
Sure.
Do you think they should be paying inheritance tax, even if they're farming? Or do you think literally no farmer should pay inheritance tax at all?
Right now, I don't think they should, because even when you've got very wealthy farmers, actually what you've got is economies of scale on the farm. And when you've got economies of scale and you can diversify what you're growing on a farm, that's a good thing for food production. We have to look through this issue, not through tax grabbing, but through the lens of food security.
There's a lot of hands. I just want to hear a little bit more before I move on. So there's the young man at the back, yeah, with the hoodie on.
You say about protecting farmers. How can we protect farmers with a climate emergency and nature recovery when we have these inheritance tax issues?
OK. Man there in the glasses, can you see it? Keep your hand up so we can get... There you go, yeah.
I think the issue here for farming is as much that farmers are not only providing food, but they're also a repository of know-how. And the understanding of the countryside, I totally accept that there is a burden on the tax pot at the moment and that we should be paying our fair share of tax. I have absolutely no problem paying my fair share of tax. My worry is that this is a tax which arrives...
Are you a farmer?
I am a farmer.
Right.
But at the point at which inheritance tax becomes due, you aren't in a position to pay it without selling an income-bearing asset, which then destabilises the exact entity that you've built up to create a profit from.
Can I ask, if you don't mind sharing with us, is that the position you will be in?
Yes, and my parents are in their 80s. So the argument from the government that, oh, it's fine, you just gift it away. 7-year rule, all of that stuff, where you can gift something for 7 years and there's no inheritance tax. It's not relevant to many, many people whose parents are farming with their children in farming estates, family businesses, and they are passionate about what they do, not because it produces an income for them on a, they don't take holidays on a regular basis. They are passionate about the land they farm, and they farm it for all of us. That's the problem.
Well, listen, so if you are to inherit your parents' farm, you're going to have to sell some of it to do so. That's what you're telling us.
There are many farmers in that position.
No, but I'm just thinking, because we've got a representative of the government here. So, yes,
we've spent 30 years doing what governments have asked us to do and diversify our farming business. They said subsidies won't be forever. Rightly, in my view, they shouldn't be. We want to sell our food for the right price, not give it to the government, as it were, for a wedge. But ultimately, we have a situation where if this policy were to persist, it will materially and existentially destabilise our farming business.
OK. Well, look, so what's your name?
William.
William is going to have to sell part of his farm should he inherit it. Is that actually what you want?
Well, firstly, just to say, well, in terms of the situation that you're talking about, I would assume, and of course I'm not asking you to talk about your personal tax issues on Question Time, obviously, but I would assume that obviously your parents are both still alive, I assume.
They're in their 80s.
So, yes, they say they're both in their 80s. So in that situation, of course, the ban, in effect, the nil rate ban for both the land and the property is going to be 3 million in that particular situation.
Let's assume that William knows his tax affairs. But he's saying he's going to have to sell some of the land if he inherits from his parents. They're too old. Sorry, I feel a bit mean saying that. They're in their 80s, so this idea that they could gift it to you for 7 years and then make no income from it, but gift it to you for 7 years and then you wouldn't have to pay inheritance tax is unlikely. So what's he supposed to do?
Well, but the first 3 million, presumably, in that situation, is going to be on the nil rate.
But are you happy, as a representative of the government here, that he will have to sell part of his land to inherit it?
Well, nobody is happy about making tough decisions, Fiona. Of course not. It's a very difficult decision that we have made. But people were asking I think the lady at the back asked about what we're doing. We will be making an enormous investment, along with reform, in our National Health Service of £25.6 billion. And I think we often talk, and the government says, about taking tough decisions, and this is a tough decision to do that. And then opposition parties say, you know, we heard Kemi Badenoch say at Prime Minister's questions last week, she backs all the investment bit of what we're doing in public services and in the health service in particular. But then when you ask opposition parties about any part of what we're actually doing, they can't tell you how they would fund it.
Oh, Minette.
I was just saying, let's a minute have a last
word. But why aren't you going after the wealthy investors, the private equity businesses that are buying up land, planting trees, offsetting their green conscience? You've done nothing to them. They're the ones that are driving the land prices. These farmers... These farmers do not want to sell that asset. That's the point. They're doing it all for the next generation. They don't want to sell that asset at all. They want to keep investing in it. This is going to stifle investment. Who is going to want to put up a new building? Who is going to want to put up a new dairy? Because that is going to make the whole business worth more money. We need that for animal welfare, for water quality, for everything else. We need to drive the investment, and nobody is going to. I don't understand why you haven't gone after this new purchaser of land. We're seeing it right across the country, and then they're coming, some of them not even paying their taxes here, are coming and pulling down taxpayers' money to plant trees and grow non-food crops. It's barking. You're going after the wrong people.
But we are certainly cracking down on tax avoidance. And to your point about long-term sustainability, that is precisely why the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has said in recent days we want to publish for the first time a long-term 25-year strategy for farm sustainability, which is going to be absolutely vital.
Can I just say, one of the questions here... One of the questions...
Really briefly, because I've got to fit other questions in as well.
One question, I think, for the gentleman who's the farmer here is... When William and other farmers have to sell that land, who's going to buy it? It's not going to be another family farmer. No. It's going to be the very equity companies. Yeah. It's going to be the wealthy, and also can buy it and exploit it.
The amount raised is not going to fund the NHS for more than a day. So just that's the perspective. Right. So why do this?
You say that about each piece of spending.
All right. OK. How long have we going? Almost 25 minutes on this subject, so forgive me, I'm going to move on. We may well revisit it. We shall see how this story develops. Let me just tell you where we are next week. So next week we're off to London, and we've got a very interesting panel, actually. We'll have the government, as usual, of course. We have the former Conservative MP, just-turned reality TV star, Jacob Rees-Mogg. We have the broadcaster, Mariella Frostrup. She's not been on for a while. Looking forward to seeing her. And also the politician-turned-podcaster, a bit of an ex-politician turned podcaster, Rory Stewart. So don't miss that. That's London next week. And I have to say, the week after that, it's an absolutely bonza panel as well. So you won't want to miss that. That's in Lincoln. Anyway, London and then Lincoln. If you'd like to be part of the audience and come and stick your hand up, ask a question, follow the Question Time website instructions, and hopefully I shall see you there, London or Lincoln. OK, let's take our next question now, which is from Issy Stone. Oh, there you are at the back.
With the US and what looks like the UK also approving the use of long-range missiles into Russia, are we closer to World War III than ever?
Lots of you asked this question and phrased it in that way, actually, asking about are we closer to World War III. I mean, the UK, I don't know, so you're going to tell us differently, Nick. The government is not confirming that these Storm Shadow missiles are being sent from missiles that have come from Britain, but that's certainly what the BBC understands. That's our understanding. Nick, are we closer than ever to World War III?
Well, look, no, I'm not going to comment on operational matters or have a debate in public about that, as I'm sure you'll understand, because that kind of open debate only would benefit Vladimir Putin in these circumstances. So obviously I'm not going to do that. But in terms of Ukraine, this has been, you know, a bipartisan issue in British politics over recent years. We supported the previous government from opposition in the measures that it took. And since the general election, we have continued to be steadfast in our support of Ukraine, whether that is in terms of providing military hardware, whether that is in terms of the £3 billion a year that we will provide to Ukraine for as long as it takes, whether that is in terms of military training. We will continue to stand beside Ukraine.
Can I ask you about that, though? Because everything... When I'm talking to MPs off the record and contacts in defence off the record, what they are saying is, particularly given that Donald Trump is about to become the President of the United States, that he's talking about ending the war in Ukraine and Americans being tired of funding the war in Ukraine on behalf of Europe, as he would see it, that what we are approaching is some kind of deal next year whereby Ukraine loses part of its territory in the Donbass, the area that borders with Russia, certainly Crimea, probably part of the Donbass, and it's just a matter of time before that happens. Aren't those the actual conversations that are going on now?
Don't accept that, and I think that we'll have to wait.
That is what people are saying.
We'll have to wait and see what the new American administration does in that regard. But what we are saying is we want to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. That's what we've been seeking to do over the past few months, and we will most certainly continue to do that, both in terms of our own support to Ukraine, which is absolutely steadfast, but also working internationally. I mean, only this week the Prime Minister has been at the G20. We will continue to build that international support as well.
So, Daisy, I know the Lib Dems have been, as you say, there has been a bipartisan approach for this, for the support given to Ukraine. But one of your own Lib Dem MPs, speaking only this week, actually, I think it was saying, actually, despite what Nick is saying, we haven't given Ukraine everything it needs. And in fact, what we've done is give them just enough to hang on in there, and it's been too little, too late. And what we have supported is effectively a war of attrition. Is that a view that you share? Should we be giving Ukraine more?
Well, first of all, let me just say we have had a cross-party approach to Ukraine in our British Parliament, and I think that has been incredibly important and served us very well. So let me just say that, first of all.
But do you share your colleagues' view, your fellow MPs' view, that actually, Mike Martin, that it's been too little, too late? I mean,
sadly, I do. I feel as though we've been behind. Since the beginning, we've been behind. We've been on the back foot. We have been helping Ukraine. We've been doing it, not just the UK, I mean, just the West as a whole. We have been slow to act. And when we have acted, it's given them enough to keep going. But at the moment, it's not enough to help Ukraine win the war. I hope
do you think Ukraine can win the war?
Well, look, we as a party have said that we estimate £20 billion worth of frozen Russian assets here in the UK. We think there's a further 20 billion around the rest of Europe. If we could get those assets and direct that to Ukraine to help them in their war, then yes, they could. I really believe they could. But if we don't do that, then it's really not worth thinking what the consequences are. I think, I mean, the question really was saying, are we heading towards World War III?
I mean, is that by giving Ukraine more, I mean, some might argue that would be the thing that could possibly trigger World War III.
Well, look, Putin is a nuclear bully. He will continue to make threats about whether he's going to use nuclear weapons or escalate. But the fact of the matter is that we cannot capitulate, because if we do, he won't stop. He won't stop where he is. He'll go into the rest of Ukraine, and then he'll carry on. He'll carry on throughout Europe, and that is not something that we can see. So we have to stand firm with Ukraine. We have to show leadership, and I believe, and my party believes, that starts by getting those frozen Russian assets and giving that money to Ukraine to give them the best possible chance, a really good fighting chance of winning the war.
All right. Man in the blue top.
It's an incredibly difficult situation. You know, I think everyone can agree here that are Putin's actions thuggish in invading Ukraine? Absolutely, yes. But the more and more this war goes on, the more and more people are dying. I don't particularly buy into this old Soviet Union style that Putin would then go into other European nations. Surely we should be working to end the conflict, like people like Donald Trump say that we're actually going to negotiate and talk to people. Surely we shouldn't be sending more and more weaponry, and we should be negotiating to end the massive amounts of people who are dying.
And what kind of deal do you think could possibly be acceptable to both sides?
The only situation and the only deal which I could see would be land that Russia has acquired and land that Russian troops are in would have to go to Russia, because you need to give Putin a way out. You can't give him a situation where you take him back to his people and he's got nothing.
Oh, lots of people shaking their heads at that. Let's see, is it the woman here with the blonde hair and the blue flowery top? Yes.
I just think if you are going to concede to Putin, you're only going to open the floodgates, and I agree with what you've said. And with a global lean to the right in many places, I worry what other doors that will open for other nations such as America at the moment.
And is this question about, about the potential for World War III? Are we ever closer to World War III? Is that something that worries you?
definitely. I work in a secondary school, and it is something that children ask on a regular basis.
Really?
Unfortunately, that is the truth, yeah.
Gosh, that's not nice to hear, is it?
No.
The man behind you in the glasses.
I agree with Daisy, and I think Putin won't stop if he is victorious in Ukraine. It may take 2 or 3 years, but then he'll be invading Poland or Estonia or the other Baltic states, and we need to start rearming now. But at the moment, we have nothing from the government beyond a commitment to, at some point in the future, consider increasing our defence spending. It needs to happen now.
We have increased it this year. We increased it in the budget by £3 billion.
That's to 2.5%.
Yeah, the aim is to get to 2.5%,
Absolutely.
but you're not, there
no,
yet.
but we also made an increase this year as well, for exactly the reason.
Let's just hear from Issy again, who asked the question. Issy's right at the back there. Yeah.
Are we not more worried about how they're going to retaliate back?
How the Russians will retaliate?
Yeah, if we're using longer range missiles, sorry.
Well, certainly there was a missile fired today by the Russians. It was not an intercontinental ballistic missile, it was an intermediate range missile. A non-nuclear one, it's worth pointing out. Harriet.
Well, I think going back to Izzy's question, that whatever we describe this period, it's clearly a very, very highly risky international period. And one of the things that we learnt from the Second World War was that you have to stand up to evil dictators. And so clearly we've got cross-party agreement here that we absolutely need to stand with Ukraine and their resistance to the invasion of their territory from this evil dictator.
But then how do you answer Zelensky, for example, of course, the president of Ukraine, who repeatedly asked for more weapons, and you've got Ukraine in a position now where they are losing ground, and they ask for weapons, and then when eventually they get given them, it's a long time after they've asked. So effectively, Ukraine is being put in a position where it can't win. It's losing slowly.
And the UK
How is
has
that
very
full-square
much
support behind Ukraine?
The UK has very much been at the forefront diplomatically, internationally, of making this case. And I think we've been at the forefront internationally and with the new government of making the case for the Storm Shadows as well. And although Nick is not able to comment operationally, and quite right too, I think it is important that we recognise that you will only get peace in this situation through strength, and we have to put Ukraine in as strong a position as possible and ensure that when they come to a time when President-elect Trump becomes president, that they're in as strong a position as possible.
So, Minette, what Issy asked, and what a number of people in the audience asked when I looked at your questions, just after you'd arrived, was how worried should we be about the prospect of World War III? Are we getting closer to World War III, the kind of belligerence from Russia, the uncertainty of what Donald Trump will do? I mean, is this something that... I mean, do you share those concerns?
I think the more things get ramped up, the more there is a level of feeling that appeasement is needed. And I would actually say the opposite on certainly my understanding of the relationship with Russia and Ukraine. If we go back to 2021, 3 months before Russia invaded Ukraine, they stopped all exports of nitrogen fertiliser. This has very much been a war about destabilising food security across the world. Mm-hmm. I had nothing to do to that point with the Ukrainian Agrarian Forum, and I had my first call with them in the spring of 22. And I saw things that were so horrific of individual farms miles from anywhere that had been targeted. Cows that were burnt alive in dairies, that were just roaming the streets because these farms have been deliberately bombed. So this isn't military to military. This has been the targeting of innocent civilians and children. And these farms that were targeted and still are, not only were those farms bombed and blasted apart, the fields were mined. So these farmers were having to go out and have done throughout this war, still planting, still harvesting, removing the mines. So there is much more to this war than necessarily meets the eye. And appeasement on any level is wrong because it will not stop. and it will continue. And you know, now bringing in the friends from North Korea, it absolutely shows you what is on the table. But the agenda has been there, I think, for all to see, just not necessarily widely reported.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take a question now. We're going to move on. Take a question now from Emma. Emma Trapmore. There you are.
Hospitals are struggling with people staying in too long and with little integration with care communities. What reforms are now needed in adult social care?
So, something like 4,000 people a day on average are waiting in hospital for care either at home or in a care home before they can leave the hospital. That's people staying sort of 2 weeks or longer. 4,000 a day on average. Harriet.
Well, the first thing I would say is that as a result of the sort of slow-moving car crash that was the budget that we had at the end of October, the care homes and social care providers and GP surgeries and pharmacies and palliative care settings who are now going to have to pay so much more in terms of employers' national insurance are going to struggle. And there will be many at the margin who will find that they are not viable.
But they were struggling, hang on, and many have argued that. They were struggling long before this budget came along. They were struggling, you know, you've had 14 years in government as Conservatives and no social care plan. So,
my point is
the point
that
of opposition, what reforms are needed in social care?
It's not going to make it any better to increase their costs in this way. You know, clearly one of the things that local hospitals here in Wiltshire and in my home area of Worcestershire are working very, very hard to do is to make sure that people who no longer need to be in an acute hospital bed are moved to social care settings. And yes, I think that is shown to have been something that we've had to pay more and more for. And many of us will be seeing in our council tax statements that we have that extra levy to pay as a result of paying more into social care. And I don't see, with an ageing population, this being something that will turn around, but it is something that we have got to recognise. And what I think has been very, very destructive in this budget is that it just seems to be making things worse.
Daisy.
I'm very passionate about this subject, so I'm going to get on my hobby horse. The Conservatives left social care on its knees. Boris Johnson stood on the steps of Number 10 and promised that he would fix social care for good. And he has left it, and the Conservatives have left it on its knees. It is in a terrible, terrible state. We as a party, we Liberal Democrats, put health and social care front and centre of our general election campaign. And I hope that many of you saw the really passionate video that was released by my party leader, Ed Davey, when he talked about his relationship with his disabled son and why he is so passionate and driven about fixing social care. So how do we fix it? Well, number one, we want to roll out free personal care. There's a huge inequity at the moment. If you have a long-term health condition, you're looked after on the NHS. You have a long-term degenerative condition, you're not looked after in social care. The second thing is...
Hang on, before you get on to the second thing, how much do you think that would cost?
Well, at the general election, the government's suggestions were that it would cost around £6 billion, but we were saying we would spend £4 billion on it because it would produce £2 billion worth of savings to the NHS. And this is the thing about social care. If you invest in social care, not only does it give people independence and dignity, it actually saves money down the line because people don't go into hospital in the first place, and you can get them out of hospital.
You can't be sure about the savings, can you?
Oh, well, all the modelling by independent think tanks say that there would be savings, absolutely. And if you look at Scotland, where they have a form of free personal care, there have been savings there too. So free personal care to start with, higher wages for care workers so they don't leave care to go and work in Amazon warehouses or supermarkets, and a Royal College of Care Workers to give them a proper voice on the national stage, give them the status that they really, really deserve.
OK, so you'd need to find at least £4 billion. I don't know how much the other things would cost, but you need to find at least £4 billion. Where'd you get that from?
Well, during the general election, we had a fully costed manifesto, and we said that we would reverse the tax cuts that were given to the big banks by the Conservatives. That would raise £5.2 billion. You could reform capital gains tax to reduce it for most people but make it higher for the super wealthy. That would also raise about £4 billion. You could double the digital services tax, and that would raise £2 billion. There are ways in which you can raise money for social care by asking those with the broader shoulders to pay more.
All right.
The man is in the middle there with a blue jacket. In the middle with a blue jacket.
When will we stop using the debate about health and social care as a political football? I think our system here is too designed around treatment in hospital and not enough about prevention in the community. This is not going to be solved in any 5-year parliamentary cycle. What we need is a long-term strategy for health and social care, and all parties to stop squabbling over it and come together and agree a long-term strategy.
OK. Woman in the pink.
I think, unfortunately, this is a historic and systemic issue, and you would actually take restructuring the NHS, the council and various other bodies in order to kind of resolve this issue, and I don't think that's quite possible. And I kind of feel that now we're almost throwing good money after bad and not really getting anywhere.
All right. And is it the person next to you's got their hand up there? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically I used to work in social care, and they do get up to about 6 weeks free care, and then after that they have to see if a means, so if they can afford to pay for a carer to come in for even more care, or they get free care if they've got enough, haven't got enough money in savings, or they have to sell, like going into, I also now work in a care home, and a lot of the people have to sell things to be able to go into a care home, which is unfair, really.
OK. And what, I mean, the $64,000 question, what do you think the answer is? I mean, this has defied governments for years. I mean, what would you say the solution is?
I think the solution is basically to allow so much care for people that really can't afford it. I mean, yeah, everybody deserves care, I understand that. But people, I've seen people in their homes and they've got nothing, absolutely nothing, no one to turn to, and, you know, no food or anything.
Nick?
Well, look, I think the discussion so far has shown the seriousness and the challenge of this issue. Now, on coming to office, the government, as I indicated a moment or two ago, has made a very significant investment into our whole healthcare system, which I think is urgently necessary. On care workers, we've already started work on fair pay agreements with carers, which I think are absolutely vital. I think, frankly, in the past, it's been scandalous how low paid our carers have been. And I think both in terms of the status we give them and their pay, that is hugely important. But I do agree with the gentleman in the middle who spoke, who said that we do need a longer-term solution to this. And the government will be publishing a strategy, a 10-year strategy for our healthcare system that I think is going to be vitally important. But you are also right to say this is going to take, I think, some cross-party consensus. This issue has been in the too difficult box in politics for too long. But to get a long-term sustainable solution, I do actually think working cross-party is going to be really important.
And in your manifesto, you promised to create a national care service. What is that? Well,
the first thing that would introduce, which I think is critical, is going to be national standards right across the country. And I think that's going to be crucial, not just in terms of the standards of care that people are entitled to expect, but also crucial, in my view, in terms of pay and conditions to ensure that we've actually got the workforce that we need as well.
And will it do anything to give more money to social care, or to make it more affordable for people to have social care?
Well, that is precisely the debate that we now need to have, and that is why, in the new year, the government will be publishing that 10-year strategy.
The man in the... You've got a sort of white shirt and a blue top on there, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the whole social care system is totally broken, messed up by all governments in the first place. workers should be paid more in social care, but in terms of NHS, there should be more money going into preventative strategies as well.
I totally
Things
agree.
like prostate cancer, for example, where you should have a screening program that could prevent early stages of prostate cancer, which, if left undiagnosed, then, the cost to the economy is just absolutely awful. So we need, better prevention strategies.
Totally agree.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I agree entirely, and that's one of the reforms to our NHS, that we need that shift from treatment to prevention, which is so crucial.
Woman in the red sweater here in the front.
Have you got a time frame for the introduction of the National Care Service? Because at the moment, a lot of the social care is picked up by small charities who are plugging the gap. And they've really struggled with the increase in employers' national insurance and the decrease in winter fuel allowance, as they quite often found a lot of people were gifting that to the charities who were plugging the gap. So you talk about a 10-year strategy, but when are things actually going to change?
Yes, when will people notice the difference?
Well, do, and I think that's an entirely fair challenge. That's the challenge that this government has to meet. And in terms of, you're talking about charities, of course we've taken difficult decisions on employer national insurance. That's entirely correct. We've had to do that. But obviously with charities, for example, they still wouldn't pay business rates. We've also doubled the employment
but hang on a minute.
In terms of that.
But just the lady in the red sweater said it wasn't a challenge; it was a question. No, which is when any of us. I appreciate you're saying it's possibly a 10-year plan, but Labour has just become the government since last July. When might any of us expect to see a difference in social care? Is it fair to expect it in the next 3 years or by the end of this?
Look, this government's been elected for a parliament, and we have to show that difference to the public. And in terms of the strategy that I'm talking about, 10-year strategy, I also say that, of course, we need to show that difference. You're entirely right. But this is also something, if ever there was an issue in politics crying out for a long-term solution, it's social care. And that's exactly what we have to provide as well.
Man here in the green top, yes.
My wife works as a care manager at a care home. You're saying that the national care, whatever you want to call it, is going to come in with more standards. You already got standards. It's called CQC.
The Care Quality Commission.
Yes. Yeah. So what are you going to do? Bring more CQC in or start another new quango? Because that's all you do. And I'll give you one other instance. A patient, or a guest at my wife's place, has paid £250,000. She is now skint. OK? The local council say they want to take her out of the home and take her somewhere else. How is that care for the patient? She's been there for 20 years, has got friends there. She's 92. All I see from your government is promises, promises. It's everybody else's fault, but not ours. It's about time you woke up to what's actually happening.
Of course, but in terms of the point that you're making, it's precisely because people, whatever part of the country they are living in, can expect that same standard of care. And it's to the point that I think you're making about the experience of the person you referred to. That's exactly why we've got to have the change. So wherever you live in the country, you can expect that high standard.
Minette.
I mean, I completely agree with so much of what has been said, and particularly what you have said just now. And I think a lot, a bit like what I was saying with farmland, our care homes have been bought up by private equity. We have less and less British-owned business. And Lord Darcy's latest report, you talk about debating it, Nick. I mean, we need to fix it because it's very clear what needs to be done. And he was absolutely adamant that he was shocked at the state of the NHS, and he was equally shocked at the state of the nation's health.
But surely what's a lot less clear, Minette, is how we're going to pay for it.
Well, his proposal was that too much money is being invested just in hospitals. And we have to get back to investing in communities, to investing in GP surgeries and investing in social care. We have to spread this, and we also have to challenge the productivity on the back of it. So, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I do think it's a huge issue that we are selling out. And local communities are really suffering. GP surgeries, we don't have a named doctor anymore. It's harder and harder to get an appointment. They could do so much of the heavy lifting in all of this if it was split evenly and the same amount of focus and ambition put on GPs as well as on hospitals and on social care. At the moment, it doesn't seem that way.
Woman back there with the glasses.
It's not really a question as such, but more as a statement. I think it's Harriet. If you spoke really passionately about what should have been done, why didn't you do it in those 14 years?
Well, we obviously put a huge amount of extra resource into our NHS and into social care, and then a terrible pandemic came along, and I think that
you were in power quite a long time before that.
I'm not in any way saying that was a good thing for our NHS and social care. It was a terrible time for our NHS and social care. It really, really was difficult, and we're
I think what
still
everyone's
dealing
groaning
with the
about
consequences.
is not the fact that there was a pandemic. I mean, we all know that was terrible, but the fact that prior to the pandemic, you had quite a long time in government to be able to come up with something and didn't. Is that a fair...
Well, I mean, I think we could be here all night talking about some of the major improvements that were made in terms of some of the things that prevention and screening and so on that we have been talking about, and I fully support that direction of travel and hope that Nick and his team are able to achieve that.
And since you're both here, and Nick is talking about cross-party working, could you realistically see yourself putting party allegiances aside? And because we've never had it on and actually coming up with a proposal that we can all live with in the future.
Yes, I think we could. I'll tell you why. Many of us come into politics because we genuinely want to make a difference. We actually want to improve people's lives. And as a constituency MP, I hear from my constituents in St Albans, as well as people all around the country, about the absolutely devastating experiences that they have when they cannot get the social care that they need. There's an estimate that more than 1 million people have got unmet care needs in this country. If Labour wants to start cross-party talks, we will be there. Not only will we take part in good faith, but we will bring along our manifesto, which set out exactly how we could fix social care, and we will put those ideas on the table as the starting point. We've got ideas, we're prepared to bring them to the table, we will work cross-party, and we want to get those solutions, because that's why we come into politics. We want to make that difference to people's lives.
And we had the Dilnot reforms, if you recall, under the time when we were in coalition together, and
I was not in coalition then.
I think they.
Well, the Lib Dems.
This was the proposal whereby you wouldn't have to sell your home effectively because it would be capped and limited. And again, that got thrown off course, didn't it, by in the last Parliament, and then cancelled completely immediately that Labour came to power.
Well, and also Conservatives delayed it as well. It was supposed to come in 2023, and then they delayed it to 2025. So whether it would have come in, we don't. I've got about a minute. Let's hear from one more person. You've had your hand up for ages. The woman in the middle, towards the back.
Thank you. If memory serves me right, I think Anne Widdecombe many, many years ago proposed a royal commission to look at the whole situation of social care and how it was funded. But why I'm here tonight is because I work and volunteer for Dorothy House Hospice, which covers 800 square miles, Wiltshire and Somerset. The new announcement of national insurance rates and the reduction in the banding of when that kicks in will mean an impact on our finances of £422,000 in this financial year alone. How does the Treasury and Rachel Reeves justify not supporting hospices which provide excellent palliative care across the country, which the NHS itself admits it cannot do as well as your local hospice?
So I've only got about 20 seconds left. I appreciate it. But is that something that the government is prepared to look at and possibly review?
Well, look, we support the budget. Hospices do a fantastic job. We've had to take a very difficult decision on employer national insurance, but charities will continue not to pay business rates, and we've also doubled the employment allowance for those smaller charities.
They should be excluded,
That's the limit of it. OK. You got your answer. I'm not sure it's the answer you wanted, but you got an answer. That is it for this week. Thank you all very much. Thank you, of course, to you at home for watching. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to our audience. Next week, London. See you there. Bye-bye.